On the record, 11:37 a.m.
Mr. Schindler, we were talking when we broke about lowering tar levels. Has RJR taken steps recently to increase tar levels of cigarettes?
No.
Why not? Is there a reason?
Well, I mean, no one's come in and said, let's increase the tar levels.
Okay. Would increasing the tar levels go against the RJR philosophy of, quote, less ought to be better, end quote?
I suppose it could. I mean, this general belief that lower tar is a better place to be, going back into the 60s and the 70s. I don't recall anybody saying, let's raise the tar levels.
Would increasing the tar level go against sort of the idea, or at least the hope, that lowering the tar levels is going to make a reduced risk or safer cigarette? Let me ask that again. I'm sorry. That's not very clear. As we just discussed, increasing the tar level of a cigarette would go against the RJR philosophy of less ought to be better, correct?
Objection.
Well, I mean, it all depends what you're saying here. If you're talking about all you have these different, you have full flavor, you have lights, you have ultra lights, and then the ultra lights. So I'm not sure, actually, I'm not sure what you mean about increasing the tar level of a cigarette, since there's these sort of four fundamental breakpoints in tar.
Right. Well, I thought you had told me before we broke that part of what RJR had done was lower the tar in its cigarettes over time. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's true of the industry, that as I understand it, the weighted average of tar across all brands and brand styles back in the 50s was 30-some milligrams. Today it's less than half of that. Okay. And that's happened just generally in the industry.
Yes, sir. But let's limit it to RJR, and I don't need to know the precise numbers. Is it your understanding RJR has also lowered the tar of its cigarettes over time?
Yeah, the weighted average of tar and cigarettes produced by RJR today is substantially lower than it was 40 years ago or whatever.
Do you know why RJR has done that?
Well, it's always been, my understanding back in the 60s, early 70s, that there was sort of this general consensus among public health officials that lower tar was the direction to go. And RJR, as well as other companies in this industry, pursued that direction of lowering tar on the notion that that's the right thing to do.
Okay. And under the notion that's the right thing to do, would you then be of the opinion that if a company were to increase the tar of its cigarettes, of a particular cigarette, that would be the wrong thing to do?
Objection to the form of the question.
You'd have to get me an example here. I don't know that if a cigarette was a full flavor at 14 milligrams and it became 16, would that be the wrong thing to do?
Well, let's take that example. Would that be the wrong thing to do?
No, it's in the category of full flavor.
So you can, as long as it's in the category of full flavor, increasing its tar isn't necessarily the wrong thing to do. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, yes, sort of. I mean, this is a very theoretical question. If you're asking me if you took all of your cigarettes back to 38 milligrams of tar, would that be the direction that a company should go or that public health people should go? I would say probably not, since the consensus is to try and drive cigarettes, whatever taste category they happen to be in, to lower tar. As I mentioned, the EU this year is implementing a maximum of 10 milligrams for all cigarettes sold in the EU. So
Well, I want to make sure I understand what you're telling me, because we're sort of drifting a little, I think. But if you had that Winston that was at 14, and you then changed it so that it's 16 milligrams of tar, that's obviously not less, correct?
Right.
And as we discussed earlier, if less ought to be better is your philosophy, more would be worse, correct?
I object to this whole hypothetical predicate. If you have a particular design to put before the witness, that's fine, but these questions are assuming either facts that are not in evidence or contained in their hypothetical points that are ambiguous and would need further explication.
Giving him the example he gave me. I'm just working with it. That's all, counsel. Go ahead, sir. Do you remember my question?
Nope, not really.
As we discussed earlier, philosophy of RJR, less ought to be better, correct?
Yeah, that's a kind of fundamental principle, if you will.
And we also agreed earlier that the converse would also be true, that if less ought to be better, more ought to be worse, correct?
In a certain context, yes.
All right. So that under your example of the Winston going from 14 to 16, even though it's still in the full flavor category, it's now delivering more under that example, correct?
Right.
And under what we just discussed, the converse of your philosophy, that more would be worse, wouldn't it?
Be higher. I don't know if
But
it's
it will-
subjectively worse.
Well, I thought if
Worse
if-
is a value judgment.
okay. Worse from the point of view of delivering more tar.
Be higher tar.
Yes. And tar presumably is the substance that's the attributed as the cause of disease in humans, correct?
Well, it's certainly something that public health officials and so forth have looked at over these many years.
So that
Tar levels.
so that raising the, if, as you gave me in the example, you raise the Winston from a 14 to a 16, that would go against the RJR philosophy of less ought to be better, unless you just don't care, I guess.
Well, I don't.
Objection to the form of the question.
I guess embedded in that is that a meaningful change.
Okay.
I mean,
Fine. So that any, and that's true also for the less also, that in order for that less to have some meaning, it's got to be a meaningful change in order for less ought to be better, correct?
theoretically. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
look, I mean, you're throwing out theoretical questions.
Sure. Meaning, you could reduce the tar of something by 1 or 2 milligrams of tar, and that's not enough less to be meaningful, correct?
I don't know.
Oh, I'm not
I mean,
pinning you down to
you're
those
sort of
numbers.
asking, embedded in that some sort of scientific perspective.
Yes, sir.
Let him finish
I'm
his
sorry, I
answer.
thought you
Well,
I understand what you're saying, and I'm not asking you to say 1 or 2 is significant or 3 or 4 is significant, but you understand the concept that there may be some numbers that, while they are less, don't necessarily make it better because it's not enough less, correct?
I don't know what enough means. I mean, you could, I suppose, because this is very theoretical, what you're positing here, that 1 or 2 milligrams, if somebody could possibly divine a certain sort of research, you might determine that is meaningful.
That's right.
Where if you just say 1 or 2, does that look meaningful? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So we're in a very, from my point of view, nebulous construct.
Sure. No. And we'll leave it to the scientists to determine. But you are aware that simply less does not necessarily mean better.
Objection.
It has to be. Let me just finish
Okay.
that thought. It has to be, as you described it, a meaningful amount less. Correct?
Objection to the form of the question calls both for speculation and for testimony beyond the witnesses testified to competence, vague and ambiguous.
Except for he just testified about it. But I want to make sure we're on the same wavelength.
I believe that having a weighted average of cigarettes at 38 milligrams versus today it's probably, I don't know, 12 or so. I think that's clearly pretty substantial difference and meaningful.
Right.
Ones and twos, I am not sure I can
Sure.
say one way or the other.
And let's just put it in conceptual terms, and I understand what you're saying. You're not coming here today to give me what is meaningful, what would be a meaningful difference, correct? But you understand that in order for less to actually be better, there may have to be a meaningful amount of less, whatever that sum may be determined to be, in order for it to actually be better. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
I think so.
Okay. Would you agree with that?
Well, since I only think I understand what you're getting at, I can only say I think I might
All right,
agree.
well, let's try it again. Let's try again. You have this philosophy, less ought to be better. Correct?
Right.
The issue is whether less is better may depend upon how much less. Correct?
I could say that theoretically that's, or conceptually, this term you're using, is true.
Okay. Because you said the reverse would be true. When I asked you going from that 14 to 16, would that be worse? You said, well, it may or may not be, depending on whether it's a meaningful difference. Correct?
Right.
And that would work both ways. Correct?
Conceptually.
Okay. Now, you talked about the EU putting into effect rules regarding how much tar can be in cigarettes, correct?
The maximum level.
The maximum
yes.
level. Okay. And presumably RJRs. Do y'all sell overseas?
We have just a couple brands. We have a brand called Reynolds and a joint venture we have with Gallagher, British company, and then our American Spirit brand that is out of Santa Fe, which we acquired a couple years ago, has some of the American Spirit styles in Europe. So they have to comply with.
That my bottom line is they're going to comply with whatever the EU
Oh
says,
yeah,
correct?
sure.
Now, there's a Reynolds, I don't know whether it's a Reynolds out of England or somewhere. Is that related to your company?
No, let me just explain.
Sure.
In June, well, in March or April of '99, the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco International, which was the sister company of this company that manufactured and sold Camels, Winston-Salem's, Doral, all of our trademarks around the world. They were sold to Japan Tobacco. And then shortly after that, we were spun off as a public company. So Japan Tobacco now owns the Winston and Camel and Salem, all of those trademarks worldwide. We have them in the U.S. So we no longer have an international business.
Is there an entity known as Reynolds International?
That was the old sister company at various times called RJRTI, Reynolds International. They were sold to Japan Tobacco.
But was the company itself sold, is what I'm asking?
Yes, the company.
Okay. So they now own that name,
They
RJR
they
International,
bought
or whatever.
well, that name doesn't exist anymore. It's Japan Tobacco
Okay.
International, and they have the rights to the trademarks outside the United States.
Let me add, just for clarity of the record, the witness is chairman and CEO, as he testified, of two different companies, and when he speaks of the company, it may be valuable for you to ask him which company he's referring to, because with regard to American Spirit, I believe that the tobacco company, which is the defendant in this particular case, is not the parent.
That's right. Santa Fe reports into Tobacco Holdings, not the,
Yes, I was just asking whether you all intend to comply with the EU regulations.
sure.
I presume you would.
yeah.
I just thought the
Oh, yeah,
testimony
no.
should be cleared up.
We weren't. That's not really an issue. Now, are you aware of various public health organizations stating that the use of the word lights in the name of cigarettes is misleading to consumers?
Objection vague.
Well, I'm aware that different, public health groups feel you shouldn't use those designators, and whether or not it's because it's misleading or whatever, that I'm not totally sure of, but I know those folks are there saying you shouldn't be able to say lights or ultralights or whatever.
Do you know why, though, they are saying you shouldn't use those terms?
Objection calls for speculation.
Absolutely certifiable? No, I can presume it's because of misleading or they don't like it or something like that.
Is RJR taking any steps to comply with the public health community's request to quit using the term lights or ultralights?
Objection vague and ambiguous. Object to the form of the question with regard to the entire public health community.
Are you talking about in the U.S.?
Let's limit it to the U.S. for right now. Yes, sir.
Now, please, again with the question.
Sure. Various public health organizations are requesting of RJR and other tobacco companies that they quit using the term light, correct?
Yeah, there are folks out there advocating it. I'm not sure, is that a total consensus of the total public health community in the United States? That I'm not sure of.
Do you know how many organizations have requested that?
No.
Do you know which organizations have requested that?
Specifically, no.
Do you know any?
Not in the specific terms that I could associate an organization with that request or that point of view or...
Okay. In any event, is RJR taking any steps to comply with whichever public health organizations have requested that they quit using the word lights in their names for their cigarettes?
We comply with what would come to us out of regulatory or legislative process in Washington or in respective states. I don't think we would comply with the opinion or point of view of a respective organization outside of that those bodies of either legislative or regulatory. That, I think we're bound as a company to respond or comply to regulatory, legislative types of actions, not the opinions of a particular group.
So that if it is not in the form of a regulation or a law, well, strike that, that's okay. Has RJR taken any steps, to your knowledge, to advise smokers of the potential significance of compensation as it relates to cigarette smoking?
No, and not on, I mean, it's on the website, I believe. There's some, I think it's on the website, some discussion of compensation.
I'd ask the witness not to speculate. If you
Okay.
remember, you remember. If you don't remember, you don't remember. If you don't know, you don't know.
Well, let's talk about your website since we brought that up. As I understand, RJR now has a website that puts various information out there for the public who have computers to
Right.
access with regard to its cigarettes and various health issues, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it is also my understanding that RJR went through a process of determining what to put on the website, correct?
That's correct.
And as, again, my understanding, that the person who made the final call on what went on or didn't go on was somebody by the name of Andy Schindler. Is that correct?
Well, yes, but there was, discussion and
Sure.
points of view, and it wasn't like I sat there and wrote the website.
No. I understand. You had a bunch of people write it, and y'all discussed it and decided what should or should not go on.
Right.
Obviously, you as a head man have the final say.
Right.
Presumably, anyway.
Right, in most cases.
Okay. Let's go over.
Unlike home, if it's like me.
I've long ago given up on home. My story of being boss at home is, the other week when my wife told me to come out from hiding under the bed, I told her no. See, I don't listen to her all the time. All right, neither here nor there. Let's mark this as Exhibit 7. And, Mark, I apologize, I don't have one for you. And, Counsel, have you had a chance to see what it is?
I see what the cover is.
Okay.
And
That is an, okay. We'll go over it. If you have some problem, let me know. This is again from the RJR files, and this was, as I understand, and you can
Yes,
correct me
I
if I'm
see.
wrong, you can look at the page, maybe the third or fourth page in, a draft of proposal to go on the website. Do you see that, sir?
Yes.
And do you recognize this, sir?
This is absolutely specific document. Do I recognize it? I'd have to say no. I mean, I absolutely remember this draft of October the 15th, 1999. No.
I understand that, but in any event, you know some drafts came before you and you discussed
Right.
them. And we'll talk about this one, see whether you remember it. If you would go to what is marked page 1 at the bottom, you'll see the page numbers at the bottom. It's really about the fourth page in of this document
Right.
of Exhibit 7.
if I could add, there's more than one page 1 in here. I noticed that Bates number 522204.
You know, you're right.
There's a bunch of,
061
there's
is
a bunch
We'll
of
do it by
ones.
base numbers.
Yeah.
How's that, Counsel?
Okay, that's
Let's look at page 52204-0261.
That's where I'm at.
The first number one. All right. And this is under the category of smoking and health, correct? On that page.
Yes.
All right. And if you would look at the third paragraph, sir.
Right.
Do you see the last sentence, and it is uncertain?
Yes.
All right. First of all, would you read that into the record so we know what we're discussing?
What this sentence says is, and it is uncertain whether, there's two weathers there.
Right.
It's uncertain whether lower yield cigarettes provide smokers with any health benefits.
All right. Was this, in fact, discussed with you when it was put in this draft?
I don't remember. I mean, I absolutely don't remember this draft. I don't know how many drafts there were. And frankly, I really couldn't say for sure if that's what's in the website today. I mean, you have to go check.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to trick you. I don't believe it is on the website. But that's not really my question. Do you recall who worked on these drafts for the website?
It would have been some folks in our sort of communications group. Some folks from R&D could have interacted on this. I just don't know exactly what this draft is. Is this something where maybe somebody in communications sat down and said, I'm just going to draft this up and send it out to get opinions? Did this emerge out of a sort of final draft after talking to the R&D guys? I really don't know.
Right. Do you have some, and again, I want you to assume, since you don't recall, that is not on the website, that sentence you just read to me. Do you have some understanding as to what occurred, as to why that was taken out of the website version?
objection to the form of the question. Assumes facts and not in evidence.
Well, one, it'd be helpful to see what's on the website today. And
Okay. And again, obviously, your website, we could go get on the computer. I could show you certain printed versions of it. But if that is not on the website, do you have some recollection as to who suggested it not be put on?
Objection to the form of the question. Are you referring to the substance? Are you referring to the language? Or are you referring...
That specific sentence, that's all I'm talking about, counsel.
You're referring to the drafting process in general, word by word, line by line?
I'm referring only to that sentence, not line by line, word by word. I'm referring only to that sentence we are discussing. I want to know if he recalls any discussion about putting it on or off, who recommended it. I'm going to follow up with more details, but that's all I'm talking about is that one sentence.
Okay, could you ask me the question?
Sure. Do you recall any discussion about taking this sentence out of the draft and putting it on and not putting it on the website?
I don't recall the draft, and I don't recall a discussion around that sentence.
Okay. And and as I understand, you don't even recall who drafted this version, correct?
No.
Do you know who drafted the version that's now on the website?
I think the main person accountable for actually writing the website after everybody sort of agreed what should be on the website, I think it was Seth Moskowitz, who works in our PR group.
Okay.
But it was somebody in communications would have had the accountability for actually drafting it. That doesn't mean, they're like an author off by themselves, writing a novel. They're compiling it to get it lined up, and the communications group accountability was to do that.
And I assume they didn't, as you just said, they didn't do it in isolation. They discussed this with various people in the company.
Through the process, yes. Where that came from, who drafted this draft exactly, I'm not sure. Why it changed, I'm not sure.
Would you agree with me? It appears that at least somebody or some group of people, when they initially wrote this draft, believed that it was uncertain whether lower yield cigarettes provide smokers with any health benefits.
Objection to the form of the question and calls for speculation.
I have no idea.
Okay. Do you think somebody would put a statement in a document for y'all to possibly put on your website if they didn't believe it to be true?
Objection to the form and argumentative.
I don't know. I don't know who did this. Who actually wrote this. I don't know out of what process it was written. I don't know. Certainly at some point an individual committed it to a sentence. Who it was, what they were thinking, did it come out of a group process? Was this something they believed or something they put in there to get comments, playing devil's advocate? I don't know. I have absolutely no idea.
Is it your understanding that any of the drafts were done playing devil's advocate?
I'm telling you, I don't know who drafted this,
Yes, sir.
how it emerged. I have no idea.
But you threw out that idea that somebody may be doing it to play devil's advocate. Is that, but bear with me, but let me finish my question. Bear with me. Do you have some reason to think or some knowledge that somebody at RJR was simply playing devil's advocate and putting language like this in a draft version?
I have no idea.
Okay. You have no reason to think that.
I have no idea where this came from, who wrote it, what the process was that got the sentence in there.
All right. Let's go on to another page. Let's go to 52204-0286. Also numbered 1 at the bottom.
0286, right?
0286, yes, sir. And the fourth paragraph, the last sentence in that fourth paragraph, do you see it where it begins, for example?
Right.
Okay. Just for the record, would you read that into the record, the for example sentence?
What it says in the draft is, for example, today there are still serious questions about whether reductions in tar have been beneficial.
Okay. Do you recall any discussions about that sentence?
No.
Do you know who put that in the draft?
No.
Do you know whether that information is contained on your website?
No, we'd have to look at the website.
Okay. If it is in fact not on your website, do you have any knowledge or information as to why it was taken out?
Objection to the form of the question. Speculative calls for speculation and assumes facts, not in evidence.
I'm not asking for speculation. I want to know if he knows why it was taken out. I'm not asking for speculation. If he doesn't know, he doesn't know.
I don't know.
Could you read the question back to me as it was stated?
Question. If it is, in fact, not on your website, do you have any knowledge or information as to why it was taken out?
Same objection.
I don't know that it isn't on the website, but if it isn't, I wouldn't know why it was taken out.
All right. Would you agree with that statement?
There's certainly people debating whether or not in the public health community as to whether or not reductions in tar have been beneficial. So you could say, yeah, people are still debating it. Through our R&D folks, and they're looking at all the literature, say that the epidemiology suggests a lower risk of lung cancer from those people who smoke low tar cigarettes, but I know people are debating this.
And let's go back to that first quote that we looked at, and that's on page 0261.
Okay, where are we?
It's the third paragraph on 0261. Do you see that, sir?
Right.
Do you agree with that statement, that it is uncertain whether lower yield cigarettes provide smokers with any health benefits?
It's kind of like the other sentence where I know it's being debated.
Okay.
Our scientists believe the epidemiology that exists today indicates through that work there has been benefit, but it's sort of like the other one where people are debating it.
All right. Let's go now to page 0294. And again, obviously, I'm just using the last four digits. So. And I'm looking at the top of the page.
This has number 3 at the bottom?
Yes, sir, it does. Do you see what is the second paragraph or the second bullet point, beginning with reductions?
And the reductions in nicotine yields?
Yes, sir. Why don't you again just read that into the record so we can discuss it?
What it says is reductions in nicotine yields may increase potential health risk by prompting some smokers to smoke more cigarettes and therefore to inhale more tar.
Do you agree with that sentence, sir?
Reductions in nicotine yields may. Well, I guess that's possible.
All right.
And
Let's look at.
Yeah.
Let's look at the very next sentence. Would you read that into the record, please?
Changes that potentially reduce one risk may increase other risks associated with smoking.
Do you agree with that statement, sir?
That's that's a scientific comment, I guess. I guess that's possible given the complexity of cigarette smoke.
Okay. Why don't we take a short break? Just so I can get organized. We're down, as I understand, the last 30 minutes.
Okay.
I'll direct it at 12 p.m. p.m.
Mr. Schindler, I took the deposition of a Mr. James Johnston. Do you know who that is?
Yeah, I used to work for Jim.
Okay. And he advised me that at least when he was, I forgot, I guess he was head of the company,
Yes.
that RJR had a policy of taking back cigarettes that did not live up to sort of your standards, whatever they may be, for freshness, or they've been on the shelf too long, things of that nature.
Objection to the form of the question. Counsel is testifying.
Do you still have that policy?
I think what he was talking about is we have a return goods policy, so that if there's a code date, there's shelf life on cigarettes, so that if they're out of shelf life, then the retailer, wholesaler could return them, and then you kind of ship back. And we've changed the policy.
Well, let me go to whatever the old policy was, and you can tell me whatever the new
Sure.
policy is. As I understand, the idea was RJR did not want cigarettes out there that did not meet its standards, whether for freshness or whatever impact it may have on those cigarettes for being out there too long. Is that your
Objection to
understanding?
the form of the question.
Well, return goods policy is about freshness.
And what does freshness do to a cigarette?
If a cigarette goes past its range of being fresh, it'll lose moisture, become dry.
It's still smokable.
Yes, but it'll, if it gets dry enough, it'll taste harsher, look better. In
And
the old days, you could get stains on a cigarette, stuff like that. So it's just it's a taste-related thing that relates to the shelf life and freshness of the product.
And as a result, RJR would take those cigarettes back for full credit, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And apparently, recently, there's been a new policy?
yes.
What is the new policy?
Rather than, we just started implementing in the last 4 months or so. 4 months. We started the new policy, which rather than returning them, that our sales force would, check code dates. If something was getting close to being out of date, then they would discount the ones at a higher rate to move them through the system, rather than returning them. It's viewed to be a more efficient and effective way to ensure your proper freshness without the expense of returning them.
Right. So that under the new policy of the last few months, RJR would lower the price to whoever was selling them, and that would then
To
allow
whoever
that
was-
person,
To whoever is buying them,
to whoever was buying it. Okay.
yes. So it's still about freshness, but it's viewed to be a more cost-efficient way of meeting the standard of freshness
Okay.
than returning them.
Now, let's go back to something we discussed earlier, and that deals with smoking a cigarette, how you smoke a cigarette. I believe you testified, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that a person can smoke a light cigarette and get as much tar and nicotine from it, depending on how he smoked it, as he could in smoking a full flavor cigarette, correct?
Objection to the form of the question misstates prior testimony. If you're asking him that question, it's a different matter.
If you're asking him that question?
If you're asking him without trying to characterize the prior testimony, you can rephrase the question.
Is that your understanding?
Well, please repeat it.
Forget the part about whether you said it earlier or not. Is it your understanding that a person can smoke a light cigarette and get as much tar and nicotine from it, depending on how he smokes it, as he could from smoking the full flavor counterpart. Is that your understanding?
That's possible. They could also smoke a lights and get less than what is the FTC spec, so to speak, on that. So it might be a 9 milligram cigarette, and depending how they smoke it, they might get 7.
Okay.
They could get more than 9. Somebody could smoke full flavor, let's say it's a 14 milligram cigarette, they could get more or less on a full flavor, depending on how they smoke it.
But let me make sure my question is clear. They could get, and let's just give as an example, a Winston Light. Somebody could smoke a Winston Light and get as much tar and nicotine from that Winston Light as they could from smoking a Winston regular, correct?
Yes, and they will get less or could get less than what the spec is. If it's a 10 milligram lights, they could get 9, or they could get 10. Yes, it could move in any direction.
Okay. But one of those directions is to increase the amount they're getting such that it is as much as they would get from smoking that full flavor version. That's
Objection.
one alternative. correct?
Objection to the form of the question. It's not in line with the earlier question.
Please
Doesn't have
ask
to
me
be
again.
applied.
No, it's ambiguous, and it's ambiguous. It appears to be a line of questions emanating from the earlier question, and it changes the presumption, changes the predicate.
I'm not sure what objection that is, but I don't have to stay on the same predicate. But nevertheless,
It's a vagueness objection. Ambiguity.
you done? Okay. One thing that could occur is that somebody smoking a light cigarette could get as much tar and nicotine from that light as they could from smoking a full flavor cigarette. That's one possibility, correct?
Yes.
All right. And have you ever heard the term, quote, elasticity of design, end quote?
I don't think so.
Okay. Now, you mentioned to me earlier the FTC numbers, or just a minute ago. Do you have any understanding that a person in smoking a cigarette actually gets the FTC numbers when they smoke a certain cigarette?
Well, information I have seen across the sort of population of lights or lower tar cigarettes is that on average that these cigarettes are delivering, this is what I got from the R&D guys, lower delivery of lower tar.
Now, that's not really my question, sir. What I'm asking you is, you are aware that there are what is known as FTC numbers.
Right.
And those are numbers that are arrived at by testing a cigarette on a machine, correct?
Yes, the testing methodology, the FTC has specified that we report to them on an ongoing basis.
Right. Is it your understanding that a smoker actually obtains, on average even, that FTC number when he smokes a cigarette?
Objection to the form of the question.
Some smokers could, some could get less, some percentage could get more than that precise number.
Have you in fact seen RJR research on that particular point?
Excuse me. Research on what, I mean, you have to clarify.
As to
what
whether
kind-
smokers are getting less, let's just take that, than the FTC number for the cigarette they're smoking.
I'm not, I know I've been in discussions and with the R&D folks, which I mentioned earlier in this deposition, where the lower tar cigarettes are delivering overall lower tar. Was that presented in the way you're talking about it? I don't remember.
Okay. Do you have some understanding? Let me shift gears just for a second. Do you have some understanding that smokers of cigarettes as a group, just whoever's smoking Winston Lights, on average get delivered to them the tar and nicotine numbers as measured by the FTC methodology?
Objection to the form of the question.
I don't know that I've ever seen it in the way you're constructing this question. I can't remember it exactly that way. May have, but I can't remember it that way.
Do you know whether on average smokers of Winston Lights or Salem Lights or Doral Lights or Camel Lights, you can take any one of those, do you know whether any of those smokers as a group get on average what the FTC number is recorded as in those advertisements for those particular cigarettes?
Objection to the form of the question. There was a grammatical error in there that makes it ambiguous.
Can you repeat it?
Sure. For any of the cigarettes that are the subject matter of this lawsuit, your lights, your
Right.
Camel Lights, Winston Lights, Salem Lights, Doral Lights, do you have any belief that smokers of those cigarettes, on average, actually get delivered to them the tar and nicotine number as recorded under the FTC methodology?
Objection to the form of the question.
The reviews I had said that on average that the light cigarettes are delivering lower tar. Exactly how that might line up on a particular brand of lights like Winston's versus Camel's relative to FTC reported numbers, I'm just not sure.
So it's possible that as a group they're getting more, it's possible they're getting less, it's possible they're getting the same. You just don't know one way or another, correct?
Compared to this respective FTC benchmark of what is reported.
When did you learn, sir, that the FTC number on a pack of cigarettes, or on a pack of, or the advertisements for the pack of cigarettes, either one, was not necessarily the actual amount of tar and nicotine a smoker was going to get delivered to him?
Well, that goes back to earlier when we talked about, I guess, when did I learn about this issue and this accusation around compensation? Again, it's back, as I recall, it's back in this 94, 96 period, as best as I can remember.
And with regard to both whether the idea that a consumer may not get the FTC number or the idea of compensation, thereby not getting less tar nicotine, either one of those ideas that you learned about in 94, 95. Has RJR done anything since that time to communicate those issues to consumers?
Other than what may be in the website, no.
Okay.
That I know of.
Let's take that person who compensates and gets as much tar and nicotine as a full flavor, as if he'd smoked a full flavor cigarette. Let's go back to that example we discussed earlier today. Is it your...
I've got to object. Are you referring to someone who switched?
Sure, I'll give a better example. That's fine if we're not sure. Let me make sure you and I are on the same wavelength. We talked earlier today about a person who's smoking a full flavor cigarette, switches to a low tar cigarette, and as a result of compensatory smoking, is getting as much tar and nicotine from that low tar as he was from the full flavor cigarette. Do you recall our discussion earlier about that?
Yes.
All right. Do you believe that RJR should inform that consumer or that smoker about compensation so that he understands he's not getting that perceived benefit of a low tar cigarette or a light cigarette?
First of all, it's my understanding in talking to R&D folks that talk about this whole issue of compensation, that compensation, to the degree it occurs in the case of a switcher from from full flavor to lights is a phenomenon that eventually equilibrates itself, and that this doesn't continue, whatever it may be in the beginning. Okay. So it is my understanding, based on what I've heard from them, this is not a sort of permanent situation. That's one thing about compensation. The other is you're talking about this theoretical individual as to, like, I know who it is, and that may compensate for a while, then stop compensating, or may have compensated for a while and decided to go back to full flavor. I don't know who that person is.
Let's say you did know who it
Someone
was.
been redirecting.
Do you think you ought to inform that person?
I don't know who it is.
But let's say you
Okay?
did.
Well, but
Let's
I
say
don't.
you know
And
it's
I
Joe
mean,
Blow.
it's an interesting theoretical
Okay.
construct, but it's an impossible one. I don't know who it is. I don't know. First of all, I don't know how they smoke full flavor. They could have been smoking a 16 or 14 milligram full flavor and be getting more than that. And now I don't know who it is. I don't know their smoking behavior. I don't know how much tar they're getting in a period of compensation that may mitigate over time. I don't know who it is. What I do know, based on talking to the R&D folks, is that overall these low tar cigarettes or lights are delivering less tar than the full flavor.
Are you aware of Philip Morris's advertising with what they refer to as their insert and onsert to advise consumers that they may not get less tar and nicotine from smoking a lower tar cigarette?
If I can ask, what's an onsert?
It is what they refer to as the some of their advertising that went out on their cigarettes, on their packs of cigarettes. I never heard the word either, but that's how they refer
It's
to it.
like-
It's now in the parlance of tobacco litigation. Insert and onsert. That's why I use them both.
It's like in the Who's Tommy, there's the overture and the underture. It's,
I
I'd
know what
rather
an
be listening to
onsert is.
Tommy than Philip Morris, but
Well-
nevertheless, we're here for tobacco,
All
so.
right.
I know what an insert is, or insert. And
Yeah, I never understood. It's a made-up word, though.
I clearly.
It is, but I used to give him grief. But anyway, let's go back.
Okay,
to this.
okay.
You are familiar with what they have done.
You just lost your microphone.
they would call that an insert.
Oh, okay.
You need to put your microphone back.
Here it is. I couldn't take my fingers off. Oh,
Oh, God.
Scott.
This is,
No, he's going to get it, don't worry.
It's twisted in the.
I'm going to let our camera guy,
Yes.
otherwise I'm going to sever the cable. All right, didn't want to mess up your system.
It just snaps.
Yeah, I know that part. It's the
Apparently.
getting it out of the wheel. And stuff. I'll let him do that.
I don't blame you. I don't want to take the blame for messing up his microphones either.
All right.
You were showing us something, just so we could, for the record. What was it you were showing us?
Well,
with
it's
the
a,
insert?
this is what I think they're talking about.
Right.
It's a little insert, little brochure, if you will. It
Right.
goes on the pack. It has information in it.
Right. And are you familiar with the onsert, as you've just described it, that Philip Morris put out with regard to their low-tar cigarettes?
Yes.
Okay. And they, in that onsert, were advising their smokers of low-tar cigarettes that they may not be getting less tar and nicotine from smoking that cigarette as opposed to a full-flavor cigarette, correct?
I think that's right. It'd be helpful if you had one here. I mean, just to be,
We don't.
okay.
But you're aware of it anyway.
Yes.
All right. And that was one way in which they tried to communicate that idea, correct?
Objection to the form of the question.
That's what they had, or I believe, as my memory serves me, one of the pieces on that insert, as we're calling it.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that your R&D people have discussed with you their view that compensation is not a long-term phenomenon.
That's as I recall our discussion.
Do you know, or did they give you any references for how they were determining long-term studies?
I don't remember that.
Okay. If in fact they said, we really don't know if it's long-term or not, would that change your thinking as to whether consumers should be advised of compensatory smoking behavior and its impact on perceived benefits?
Objection to the form of the question.
But that isn't what I recall that they said.
Yes, sir. Well,
We talked in those reviews about this whole compensation issue. We talked about data that they presented that overall low tar cigarettes or lights are delivering less tar. And that's what was reviewed and presented.
okay. Again, I just want to focus on the length of it. Your understanding is they have advised you that it is not a long-term phenomenon, correct?
Yes, I guess for most people, the majority or whatever.
Are you aware of some of their testimony to indicate they don't really have any long-term studies to determine whether it is or is not a long-term phenomenon?
Objection to the form of the question.
No, I'm not aware of their testimony.
Have you reviewed any of the testimony that's been given in this case?
No.
Let's switch gears for a minute. Cigarette smoking is addictive, correct?
Well, if you, in my view of it, if you're talking about addictive in the terms that people use that word today, you'd say certainly. But if you're talking about addictive, implying that cigarettes are like drug addictions or alcoholism, I would disagree.
Y'all have some experts in this case that have talked to us about both drug addiction, as you've described it, and cigarettes being on the same continuum. It depends on the severity of the dependence. Are you familiar with that?
Objection to the form of the question.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with what you're talking
Okay.
about.
All right.
You're into experts on addiction.
Regardless, do you know what it is in cigarettes that makes them addictive, even under the common parlance today?
I would guess it has obviously something to do with nicotine, probably something to do with the behaviors associated with smoking. I think my view would be it'd be more than just simply nicotine.
Right.
There's
Nicotine.
a whole behavioral thing with cigarettes.
Right. Nicotine is one of the factors that plays a role in the addictive nature or the addictive quality of cigarette smoking, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Do you recall when you came to the opinion that it was nicotine that caused cigarette smoking, was one of the reasons cigarette smoking was addictive?
Objection to the form of the question.
Well, given my age, the view that cigarettes are addictive, and particularly I think people trying to associate it with addiction to cocaine or heroin or what have you, happened in the last 15 or 20 years. Growing up as a kid in the 60s, for example, late 50s and 60s, hard drugs were viewed as addictive, cigarettes were viewed as habit forming. Generally, in the parlance of the time, I think people associated that habit in those days with with nicotine. I mean, there was jargon, nicotine fit, stuff like that. But this addiction thing, as it associates to heroin and cocaine and that sort of thing, I think is, my own view, is not an appropriate analogy.
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear the
It's
last
not an appropriate analogy in my view.
In your, okay. Did you ever have a doctor tell you to quit smoking?
Yes,
Did you listen to him?
I'm smoking today.
Does that mean then you have not,
I would-
obviously have not paid attention to him?
I would think that I've decided to, I'm an informed adult, and I enjoy smoking, and I'm smoking in spite of what my doctor has said to me.
Did your doctor ever tell you, smoke a light cigarette?
You mean somewhere over the continuum of time?
Has the doctor ever told you that?
Maybe. I don't clearly remember it. I mean, we're in Winston-Salem. I smoke Eclipse. There's a lot of people understand in Eclipse and the nature of it and its potential for reduced risk. So somebody wouldn't say to you if you're, they'd say, I don't think you should smoke, Andy. I don't think they would suggest a cigarette other than Eclipse, given sort of a
Right.
body of knowledge around it.
Do you try to keep up with sort of the various issues going on with cigarette smoking?
Objection to the form of the question vague.
Of course it's vague. It's general. I'm trying to, we'll pin it down. You try to keep up with what's going on, don't you?
There are so many issues. I mean, seriously, you got to be what kind of issues are you talking about?
Okay, that's fair enough. When did you first see any TV shows or newspaper articles that said low-tar cigarettes may not be safer?
Gosh, I don't remember. I mean,
Have you ever seen any, like the 60 Minutes show on light cigarettes?
I can't remember seeing the 60 Minutes show.
Okay. Are you aware of RJR adding ammonia to your, I think it's called tobacco sheets?
Objection to the form of the question. Assumes facts, not in evidence.
Yes.
Okay, now it's in evidence. Is it your understanding that that adding that ammonia to the tobacco sheet increases the pH of the smoke of the cigarette?
Honestly, I'm not sure if it does or it doesn't sitting here.
Okay. Are you aware, however, if you increase the pH of the smoke of a cigarette, you increase the amount of free nicotine?
I'm aware that that's an accusation. I don't believe, from my understanding, that is held up by the science. But you have to talk to the R&D guys.
Okay, well let me, you have this? Let me just show you a document. We will mark as Exhibit 8.
By the way, I think you've got under 5 minutes. Just might want to confirm.
You know, I'm happy to go longer.
No, that's all right. I'm just letting you know.
I appreciate it. This refers to ammoniation of tobacco, correct? Do you see that?
Objection to the form of the question.
It says at the top of the memo, technology, ammoniation, and it has definition, background.
Okay. All right, and I'm just going to look at the second page is what I want to reference.
Can I just say you haven't laid a foundation with this document?
Okay. Do you see where it said that among the product characteristics of this ammoniation is milder, smoother taste?
Where are we?
I'm on the second page, sir, at the sort of the bullet points.
Oh,
You
yes.
see that? Is it your understanding that ammoniation does give it a milder, smoother taste?
Objection to the form of the question.
Yeah, it's my understanding that ammonia, well, we use ammonia to affect taste.
Okay. And the second bullet point in this document, which is Exhibit 8, is that it gives a higher smoke pH. You don't recall that one way or the other.
No, that's what it says.
Right. And then if you look 2 down, it says cleaner taste with more free nicotine. Do you see that, sir?
I'm going to object on a number of grounds. First of all, lack of foundation with the document. Secondly, vague and ambiguous. Third, it says this refers to ammoniated flue-cured tobacco and not to the sheet that you were referring to. It's the previous paragraph. Recent internal panel testing of products with ammoniated flue-cured tobacco. It doesn't refer to ammoniated sheet.
Yeah.
So I think it's attempting to mislead the witness.
If you read the whole document, I don't think I'd necessarily agree with you, but go ahead. Do you see where it said one of the product characteristics, and actually I guess it two, a cleaner taste with more free nicotine?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what the significance of more free nicotine is?
No, it is my understanding. I don't know when this, do you know when this document, what year it comes from? It looks like a fairly old one. I mean, it looks like it's in the 70s or 80s, or early 80s.
Well, I don't have a date on it, sir. I don't know. It's obvious. It's one of your documents. Obviously, they referenced something in 1979, so I assume it's something post-1979. I don't have anything beyond that with me, at least right now.
Okay.
But regardless, do you understand whatever significance more free nicotine would have for a cigarette?
Objection.
I understand that this is, frankly, from other depositions where I've seen more documents, that back in the 70s there were theories about free nicotine. It's also my understanding with our R&D guys that we don't have any more nicotine being delivered in the products we produce today than we had back then.
Yes, sir.
So that seems to me to sort of say that this theory about free nicotine isn't valid.
Yes, sir. But I think we're talking two different things. When you talk about more nicotine versus more free nicotine, that's a difference, isn't there?
I don't know. If you want to, I mean, you need to talk to an R&D folks.
Right. That's not
about
something
this.
you're familiar with as to what.
I know the term. I am not a scientist, and the theory behind all of this free nicotine and so on and so forth.
Okay. Do you know whether an increase in the, well, let me ask this. Do you know whether ammoniation increases the amount of biological activity of a cigarette?
I don't know.
You don't know one way or
Okay,
the other?
that's 3 hours. I've just gotten the word from the videographer.
Well, I'm happy to keep going.
No, I think that's our agreement in these, the rule on.
I think that's the rule. That may not be an
Yeah.
agreement I'd like to
Yes.
have, but
I'm going to stick
if you
with
cut
the
me
rule.
off,
Yeah, I think we're all going to stick with the rule.
I understand.
Thank you. Thank you. That's it.
I'll correct it.
Mr. Schindler, thank you.